Happy Friday, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you so much for joining. We have everyone trickling in here. We have Patrick, Lourdes, Zachary, some familiar faces. It's so great to see you all on this Friday. I hope that you all had a great week, but we are going to end it on a bang here with another incredible guest and Matthew, coming from an awesome organization, and he's going to tell you all about that. But before we do get into it, folks, just wanted to go over some quick house rules. This is a safe space. There's no such thing as a stupid question or silly question, or whatever you want to call it, right? I do encourage people to jump into the conversation. We're going to probably leave some time for some Q&A, probably around the 30-minute mark. So just if you do have a question, if you want to join in the conversation, and we want to keep these questions related to the conversation that we're having right now today, okay, folks? And raise your hand, and I will bring you up around that 30-minute mark. In the meantime, I just want to let you know that we do not talk anything about that's directly related to financial advice. If it's a little bit too spicy, probably for like your family dinner or something that you would have, talk about at Thanksgiving dinner, we want to definitely avoid that here so that things can run smoothly. But I'm super, super excited to have this conversation, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Matthew. Matthew, how's your day going so far?
Good afternoon. It's been decent. The futures market gets my emotions on a roller coaster, but focusing on my startup always it's a good way to wrap up the afternoon for sure.
Yeah, indeed. And tell us, folks, where are you located?
Predominantly Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is why it sits on my LinkedIn page, but I'm actually calling out of Athens, Georgia right now. And I'm sort of transitioning into a digital nomad lifestyle. I think it's quite fitting with all the business travel that I get to do, especially coming up. I mean, Hawaii, Japan, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, Mexico. I'm going to be all over the place, but I am calling
Yes.
out of the South right now.
Right on. Well, I'm jealous of you because it's probably a little bit warmer down there than it is here in Boston. We're kind of teetering around 50 or 60 degrees, but I guess that's pretty fair for a fall day this time of year. So let's just jump into it, man. Tell us a little bit about, how this all started, and you have a unique background. You started writing back when you were 17, right? So kind of lead that to how did this all start for you? How does real estate tokenization and then you starting this organization, how does this all come into play?
Yeah, my entrepreneurial background has been all over the place, to say the least. I can't say that from a young age I was always poised to be in real estate or technology. There might have been some hints, some signs. I liked programming. I liked gaming as a youngster. I don't have any time for it now. And I really liked writing. I don't know how I gravitated towards that, but I could sit down at a computer and just write stuff out. I remember I was maybe 9, 10 years old, and I already had a 30,000 word manuscript. And that was just entertaining to me, coming up with like a fictitious world. So I guess that did point me to publishing a book when I was in high school, but it didn't set me up for a career. That's for sure. The
Mm,
starving artist, you know, stereotype is quite real. That if you're going to write stuff, you have, or even create music, which is something else that I did. You have to expect that you're going to be in the 99% who don't get any recognition, and you're probably better off doing it as a hobby, which is what it is for me now. And that, raised the question: what am I going to do for the rest of my life? How am I going to make money? That had me gravitate towards e-commerce and the stock market in particular. I'm still a little involved in the markets, whether it's futures, options, or well, I don't do small cap equities anymore, but that was where I got my start. Penny stocks, which is a place where I really can't give financial advice because I did lose a lot of money, and so it wasn't permanent getting into that, but it taught me so much about finance and economics that when I finally did get to commercial real estate because of my cousin who had been investing, I had a pretty sound understanding of how money moved, between what parties and what people are looking for in an asset class. And that's been so essential in forming my current company, because if you're going to use technology, you have to use it really carefully.
Yeah.
You have to have an objective, and our objective is risk mitigation. Can we minimize risk in an asset using technology? And that has set us apart, quite frankly. We're not trying to shill anything, we're not just shilling a coin or trying to tell people to invest. My question is, can I cut costs and maximize value for a real estate property using technology? I mean, I didn't figure that out right away. It took 4.5 years of going to customers, asking them, hey, if you're building a property, what technology do you use, and what technology would you like to use? What would make your life easier? And learning over time where we could fit blockchain, software, artificial intelligence into a tech stack. And ultimately that became building, where we realized we got to manage data, we got to collect it, utilize it, and then we can put it into capital markets. And we can put that property backed by data into capital markets as a token. That's where some interesting value appears.
Nice, very nice. And I remember when we had our conversation, there's a lot of buzz around, real world assets, tokenization, real estate, and things of that nature. So, how are you really kind of trying to reimagine real estate, through tokenization, and what really kind of sets you apart from some of the others in this competitive landscape?
Well, there's certainly a transformation
Mm-hmm.
occurring. I mean, tokenization is touching a lot of industries: supply chain, logistics, procurement, equities, bonds, real estate, art. It's having pretty profound impact, or at least it's predicted to do so. But there's some steps along the way that can't be skipped, and we recognize that. And I would say that that's what sets us apart. I'm not creating a marketplace for people to invest into stuff. I could do that eventually. I'm not promoting an investment or promising liquidity or any sort of false claims about investment returns. I'm thinking, how could tokenization or the use of a blockchain change real estate at its core? How properties are built? Can we use this in construction? Could this add transparency to project management and underwriting? If those things are completed, does it reduce risk? Does that make the building perform better? If it performs better, then eventually, is it a better investment? Is it better for collateral? And I would say the answer is yes. And so, how we are imagining that commercial real estate, I use that as an umbrella term. So that could mean an office building, but it could also be multifamily or a data center, retail, mixed use. We imagine that there's going to be, I say dots connected, less fragmentation, communication. There's going to be almost a synergy, a harmony in this industry that it hasn't seen before. Historically, it's really lagged in productivity and technological adoption. And it's because information is so siloed.
And talk to me a little bit more about some of the kind of traditional problems that are experienced in this industry, and why should I would say, everyday person, the average Joe, be concerned about what you're doing right now and the kind of technological advances being made in this space?
Yeah, commercial real estate sounds big and fancy, but we all interact with it every single day. I mean, it makes up our cities. That's why commercial real estate, or real estate in general, can't be left behind when it comes to innovation.
Hmm.
These are places that we live, that we work, where we hang out. These eventually make up our investment portfolios. If there's problems in how something is built, it can hurt people. Like that's a real problem. And we're seeing more of this throughout the country, actually, where our building practices, the way that we insure stuff, there's real fallout if it's done improperly. And so if we go back to the base of the issue, can we start improving how these are built, how buildings are built? Can we ensure that stakeholders are on the same page and reduce error, human error, or hardware error, and doing that long term as well? And I think the answer is actually yes, because in a big industry like commercial real estate, there's too much incentive to sweep problems under the rug if it
Mm,
means saving money down the road. But if something, if that information is collected, if we have people verifying this, auditing it, and then you use a blockchain to essentially anchor that information, there's a massively reduced risk of these issues occurring.
yeah, I like that. And that brings me to the next question because I was thinking about this, and I know that you put a lot of thought to this as well. What are some of the kind of ethical considerations that you think more companies in this space should be addressing more openly? I mean, you talked about transparency and sustainability, so kind of touch on that a little bit more.
Well, we're, engaged in two industries here. I think commercial real estate could do a lot of things better, and I think the blockchain and technology industries could do a lot of things better. Starting with commercial real estate, I think our cities in general, at least in the US, are designed and maintained really poorly. And part of that problem is just how we set out in the beginning to capitalize as much as possible on assets and developments. Some of it is just that innovation is lacking. Like if stakeholders aren't communicating, then things don't get built right.
Mm,
If the financial incentive is in the wrong place, then we're not thinking about how do we make this best for people. We think how do we make this best for a profit, right? A
mm,
financial return. So commercial real estate has many ethical things to reconsider, but I think some of that carries over in the blockchain scene. I, the topic of coins and investments and trying to make as much money as possible, I think that's such a foul use of the technology.
mm,
Like there's a purpose for tokens and different smart contracts and coins, but they're really byproducts. It befuddles me that that became the center of attention, but at the same time, anything that can make people money sort of becomes the center of attention. And I think
mm.
we need to take a step back and ask, like, are we going to use this technology for real, like in serious use cases? Or are we each trying to introduce a product that's going to rip some people off so that we can go vacation somewhere?
Yeah. And in terms of some of the challenges that you face kind of bringing this tokenized real estate into traditional capital markets, and how has that been with navigating it so far?
Well, it did take years to figure out a couple things. One, if the idea of tokenization was going to stick around, and two, if it was going to be used by institutions, what are they looking for? What are they interested in? And not
Mm,
just institutions, the everyday person or the end user. What do they want out of this technology? And it goes back to risk management. Can this improve the bottom line or the top line of a commercial real estate project? Can this become safer? Can this perform better? Can this become an intelligent building, a smart building? And that's a big thesis for us as well. Can we have smart cities, intelligent portfolios, smart portfolios?
and can you talk to, before you go into that, can you just maybe for the people in the audience that they've never maybe heard of this concept of smart cities, or this kind of sustainable building when it comes to real estate, can you just touch up on that a little bit or educate us, to kind of give us a brief overview of what that's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different angles that you can look at smart cities. From a purely technological angle, these are buildings or parts of society that are using technology to improve stuff like traffic flow or energy efficiency, real mundane stuff that perhaps technology could do a little bit better than your average person. Then there's the actual human components. Can we make cities that are planned more efficiently or effectively? Can we optimize the flow of people and traffic, whether that's foot traffic or vehicular, so that at the end of the day, these cities become productive and resilient? And the resilient piece is where sustainability comes into this as well. I think historically we've really built for the short term, and it goes back to some of the ethical issues of um, maybe ethical financialization of commercial real estate, where it's all about making money. And that
Yeah.
can be problematic long term because oftentimes people will take shortcuts in the short term and someone pays the price for that in the long term. But if we're thinking, how do we increase longevity of buildings? How do we minimize environmental impact and ensure sustainability goals are met? How do we consider the health and the well-being of the people living and working in these? Some of that's urban planning, some of it is technology. If we're measuring, because what gets measured gets managed, if we're measuring air quality index, we can assume that we're going to fit that into parameters and say, hey, this is not clean, we need to do something better, or this is being well done, how do we improve it?
Nice. I like that. It definitely makes me think about a lot. And in terms of something that you've really kind of found to be like mind blowing in your experience so far, that you've learned about this technology while building your company that you maybe didn't expect. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, I hadn't imagined that I would be in data management initially, but at the end of the day, that's what a blockchain does really well. It's not a place to store data. But in terms of ensuring the integrity of that data, providing what we call data provenance, that's become such a focal point for me. And I hadn't realized that setting out. I was kind of stuck in the democratization utopia, but we can do that without blockchain. We have to ask ourselves, what does blockchain do really, 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 really well?
Mm-hmm.
And transparency and authenticity and replacing truth with trust is what blockchains do.
And do you feel like just in the traditional kind of space that this kind of trustlessness, or that there's just it's a rampant problem, or what are some of the reasons for that? Or do you think this is it's just that that's the way it's always kind of been, and people are just trying to, you know, maximize profits? Like, why was the system so broken, and what is this technology going to be doing to kind of help fix that?
Well, there's a lot of people who stand to benefit from the errors in the current system. That could be people who capitalize on information that should be revealed and isn't, and so they get a better deal on something.
And like, what
It
kind of
could be
information might be hidden?
so if a property is being sold and there's facilities issues, it could be your roof, it could be the air conditioning, it could be the foundation.
Hmm.
Well, it wouldn't be financially wise to admit to that. And if no one picks up on it, then we're going to sell the asset without raising that concern, and it becomes the next person's problem. That is not how you build cities with longevity or commercial properties that uh, have the people and stakeholders in mind. That's one person's financial interest. So if we can add transparency to asset health and performance, that's really great. Although there's people who capitalize on that and they don't like the idea as much. Then there's traditional intermediaries. We know that a blockchain is a peer-to-peer network. And so that means transactions between people or parties can be direct without having four stops in between where someone's taking a percentage off the top. And in some ways, none of it's necessary, but it's it's always been how we've done it.
Yeah.
And so we kind of let that problem snowball to the point where you have these massive multi-billion-dollar institutions that exist and are fighting to stick around, but don't serve a major purpose, or the purpose that they do serve is eventually going to be automated by some sort of technology.
Now, have you had a lot of pushback from people in the industry when you're starting to? I mean, this is disruptive, right? This can break up the status quo. So, have you had a lot of pushback and opposition from the kind of traditional individuals that may be not necessarily excited that you're coming onto the scene with a product that could maybe, reduce some of their profits?
Not with the parties that we're interacting with. So I'm talking to commercial estate developers and a lot of their immediate stakeholders. They love the idea of optimizing returns, having better communication, better productivity, and ensuring that this building is built to last, especially if they own that for the long term. It's in their best interest. I think the industry as a whole is seeing the resistance from existing players, the incumbents.
Mm.
And that's really obvious in banking and the banking financial industry, where the tide is starting to turn, but people are saying, I'm not going to adopt this. I don't need it, or raising concerns that aren't as major as they ought to be. But these companies are trying to save face and stick around while they can. And that's probably why it's taken a little bit longer than it should to implement this technology. Now, there's been some companies that have done it quietly because they see the utility. Like Walmart has been using blockchain for a long time. Makes sense in supply chain. But in other areas, that outspoken resistance or drawing attention to coins and saying, "Wow, don't trust blockchain or decentralized ledger. Think about the crypto." It's not about that. It's a scapegoat to try to resist technological adoption. But again, the tide is kind of turning where large funds and asset managers and financial institutions are interested. And if they want this technology implemented, they're going to get their way.
Yeah. And do you feel that being someone that's trying to, solve these real world problems, and there's typically the attention that comes to our space is one, it's something negative, or it's, for any of these other things that necessarily aren't trying to solve a true problem. Does that motivate you, or does it sometimes feel like demotivating that like all of this like noise continues to get attention, or that we're kind of always under the radar, for whatever the case may be, money laundering, etc. How does that kind of make you feel, and how do you continue just to kind of move forward and not let that really interrupt your vision?
Well, this isn't very altruistic, but all that noise makes me a signal amongst that noise. And I appreciate that. Um, if if other people were talking about the same issues and solutions that I'm talking about, I think it would advance the industry a little bit further, naturally. At least that's the way that we foresee it. But right now they're not, and so I've taken it up as my hill to die on, to raise these issues, and it's been beneficial to us, at least. It sets us apart, where people say, "Oh, that's an alternative use of the technology that we hadn't considered. I'm going to look into this." And as a company, it's starting to allow us to grow and prosper, and most importantly, be taken seriously. I don't
Yes.
get lumped into crypto anymore. People don't see us as anything to do with crypto. They think data, actually. And
Mm.
data is a pretty good category to be grouped into, whether it's big data or intelligence and artificial intelligence. So I hope that I don't, that my talking points don't, stay so siloed long term, because that would mean that the industry isn't growing. But for now, it's quite motivating, actually, that people are going to be talking about silly stuff, because it allows me and my partners and our customers to be recognized as serious contenders, a force to reckon with in blockchain.
Absolutely. I love that attitude. And, shifting a little bit to your company and as it grows, talk a little bit about what you've built so far and how are you planning to kind of maintain that culture and identity that's obviously setting you apart and makes you special?
Well, so to look at culturally who we are, it's one thing to be on the cutting edge of an old industry, talking about blockchain and commercial real estate. And it's another thing to be on the cutting edge of the cutting edge, where you're using a new technology in even newer ways. And it takes a certain level of ambition, risk tolerance, and passion for the problems that we're solving. Like we have firsthand experience, but then additionally, a real passion to see these issues resolved. And that maintains true regardless of how many new issues pop up. We might implement technology and then we realize that there's more holes to plug.
Yeah.
And if the people that I work with, and I would say myself, we're always thinking, how do we fix this? How do we make this better? How do we improve this? And constantly looking for that next opportunity. It's not, if there's more problems, it's not really an indication that something has gone terribly wrong. It's just an opportunity for us to resolve. And I think that that mentality has shaped the companies that we're building. And if we hold on to that, we'll continue with this level of momentum.
In terms of just like some of the social and economic impact that your organization is actively working towards, kind of help us elaborate a little bit more on that as well too.
Yeah, so if we look at social or community impact, that's where smart cities become really important to us. Technology is one thing, but if we're changing the built world, the built environment, and we are encouraging sustainability or better urban planning or communication between people and stakeholders and having that synergy, fundamentally, to me, that is a societal or civilization task that I'm willing to undertake, because it's maybe a little utopian, but it's about making the world a better place and starting with the technology that we have in our hands and seeing if we can use that for good. So I mean, social is really important, but there's a lot of new social impact opportunities that come from blockchain as well, and different sorts of tokens. You can think about stable coins and how capital is going to move. Are we going to start banking currently unbanked populations or communities? How is that going to uplift them if they have new developments that can occur, new prosperity that comes out of that, economic, social? I mean, it's really all tethered together. I mean, that's exciting, right? And could this uplift the middle class? Could it restore wealth there? Are we going to reduce the gap between the haves and the have-nots?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just a societal issue, or a social issue, but it's a societal issue as well. Because, I mean, sure, you can squander wealth from the lower and middle class, but eventually it just becomes too unstable, right? It's not even good for business to rip people off. They don't have money, they don't spend it. So there's every interest in every person to recalibrate how we're doing things and aim for a more equitable prosperity is how I would describe it. I know that sort of puts people on edge. It's like, well, equity, and that's become a buzzword, politicized, but why not strive for that?
Absolutely. Strive for it for sure. And I'll open it up because we're at the halfway mark here, folks. This has been extremely insightful. So if there's anyone in the audience that does have a question or you just want to join in, add a comment here for Matthew, please feel free to raise your hand and we will bring you up. And while we're waiting for folks, I know it's Friday afternoon here, if you just want to relax and just continue to take in this knowledge, feel free to do so as well. But one of the other questions that I had for you, as I do wait for anyone that does want to jump in, if they do, is, how do you think that tokenization and blockchain technology, and we haven't even gotten to AI, all this other stuff, but how do you just think those two technologies are going to potentially kind of influence the future of work, especially when it comes to a lot of rise within remote teams and decentralization and all of that?
The future of work. Usually I get asked about the future of living, but I do think that blockchain and smart contracts in particular are going to have decent influence over the future of work. There's some use cases that we're looking at adjacent to data management and tokenizing, commercial properties, and that's revolving around using smart contracts between parties, whether that's in supply chain, in procurement, in investments. I would hope that the outcome of a more programmable contract between people, it's really more of an outcome or an output instead of an input. Like, this is the result of people not doing business properly with each other, and so we need programmable contracts in place. But hopefully the result is that working relationships between people and businesses are strengthened because that risk is reduced and transparency is increased.
Yeah, for sure. Let's shift it a little bit here to some of the other kind of fun things as well too. So, you're definitely leading the charge and doing some really cool things. But what's maybe, I would say, an exciting use case for this technology that maybe people aren't thinking about yet?
Well, I think fundamentally the way that we approach this is one way that people are not thinking about using it. In terms of blockchain technology in the construction industry, we've got to be one of, if not the first, to utilize this approach. I think people should not underestimate what blockchain can do in legacy or uninteresting industries. There's a lot of room for reform and technological improvement in these areas. And just going back to the basics, what does a blockchain do really well? Well, it's a ledger for transactions. It's decentralized. It can't be manipulated. So it's going to hopefully add transparency to new areas. It shouldn't all be about financialization. That's how we view blockchain right now. Can we create an investment or a token? Can we, if we're going to tokenize art, does that mean there's liquidity and people can invest into it? I heard someone mention actually that they're trying to utilize a tracking technology that goes onto art, and anytime it's moved, that's reflected on the blockchain. That's a really cutting edge use of the technology. It's sort of like supply chain in logistics. As stuff moves around, are we ensuring the integrity of its physical presence? And that's why DePIN, decentralized infrastructure, is also really interesting. Like, are we going to keep track of stuff that's happening in the real world and record that with a level of immutability using a blockchain?
I love that. Now, let's talk a little bit more about maybe the convergence of some other technologies as well too. So, I think that when we chatted, we were talking about, all the data, right? And you mentioned this before, data. So all the data that we're gathering, and really interesting use cases that, when we're building these buildings, and then obviously we've heard about all the horrible hurricanes that we're having and stuff like that. Like, could we be able to find out what type of materials are better, and then having AI to be able to analyze that, so then that input can then be used to help determine, what's a better way to build future real estate in particular areas, and then sharing that knowledge. So are there any other kind of just like things that you think about where it's just like, wow, if we could really converge, IoT, DePIN, AI, and blockchain, what's some magic that we can make happen?
Well, you did mention it. I think the use of blockchain for intellectual property, especially in something like commercial real estate, would be valuable. There's different building practices and building processes and standards to uphold, and we would want that information to be collected and verified and hopefully reused. And this is where the marriage of artificial intelligence and blockchain is is massive, because we're running into the issue that we're getting answers or suggestions or recommendations from artificial intelligence that is detached from reality. It needs to be fact checked fundamentally. And if we can link back information to a source, a verified source, I mean, then we can start to trust, the artificial intelligence a little bit more. Because the worst thing would be if an AI model is being purposely manipulated to cause problems in an industry, in a country, with competitors, whatever that might be. I do have a friend who's working on an interesting use case with blockchain and AI in the real world, focused on media. I mean, there's a big uptick of deep fakes and manipulation using artificial intelligence. And this could be a political nightmare, a societal nightmare, if war is announced using a completely manipulated or fabricated media. And so we would want to start to only trust information that has been vetted using a blockchain, and we can trace back, where certain information came from. So I think that convergence of data and data integrity, it's it's a great combination, and I can't even list all the different ways and all the different industries that it's going to impact, because at the end of the day, everything is data. It could be medical records, right? Or
Even supply chain. I mean, we were just talking about that as well too, right? All of that coming in. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for, things to get better, quite frankly. And if you had unlimited resources and no limitations, how would you continue to radically transform this space? So you're already doing it, but how would you even bring it to another level?
Well, what I'm trying to do right now with the limited resources that I have, but could be amplified, is making this a global phenomenon. And as I think about it, getting this as horizontally and vertically integrated as possible. The more stuff that we can get on chain, the more fluently this all begins to work together in harmony and synchronicity. That's going to be a little bit expensive and difficult. There's a lot of tech stacks that are going to have to be rebuilt and reimagined, and that could be costly for people. And even just building the technological solutions from the ground up is going to be tricky. But if we can get as much as possible on chain, I think that's a net positive, and it really brings out the highest potential for the technology. An example would be, if we're going to create tokens for people to invest into a property, and the value of that property is dictating the tokens, well, we're going to want to have verification, and how that value is being calculated, what information is going into that. Well, that can trace back, like we said, to supply chain and procurement. Well, then we can start using smart contracts in those areas, which is another blockchain use case. And perhaps transactions are occurring using the future token of this property, or a stable coin backed by the property itself. And what you start to see is this spider web of connectivity using blockchain technology between parties and people and different steps of a process that could be years apart, years and miles apart, right? But now we've sort of brought it full circle. I think it's going to be expensive, right? Which is why, the core of the question, like if we had a lot of money, what would we want to do?
Yeah.
Get as much on chain as possible, but it's going to be tricky. But that is the utopian vision for the technology.
And lastly, before we kind of really shift to what you're currently doing and some of the things that you're involved with, if you could predict a major tech breakthrough in the next decade or so, what do you think that would be, and how might it change the way that we work collectively?
That's a good question. If if I could predict beyond what I'm already working on, that would be a super useful. There's the answer to the superpower question. If I had a superpower when it comes to technology, it's predicting the next technological innovation.
Yes.
Because
It's so
I mean,
hard. It's so hard to keep up with it, right? I mean, how do you go about staying up to speed with all of this? I mean, for me, quite frankly, there aren't enough hours in the day. I feel like that you're always connected, you're always going, and even when you're not, connected, whatever that may be, right? That there's always still something to tap into when it comes to this industry. If you blink, something may change, right? Technology can become redundant within a very short amount of time. So how do you even stay up to speed with all of this, not only related to what you're currently working on and building, but just taking in the massive amounts of data and even understanding what your competitors are doing in this fast-paced space?
that's a good point because sometimes I'll see some article come out somewhere about the technology being used, and it kind of makes me anxious because it's like, wow, the industry is leaving us behind, and we thought that we were building the latest and greatest thing, and here's a new use case or a new massive party has entered the field and is now taking over market share or something like that. But at the same time, there's a rule of thumb that things that come quickly go just as quickly, and that's sort of reassuring. You know, even artificial intelligence, which has so many great use cases, it might have showed up really quickly, and we thought, oh, this is going to change everything. It's going to change the world. And yeah, there's rapid innovation that's occurring, even more so than in the crypto space. But at the same time, you turn off the screen, and suddenly all that disappears. So it's sort of like tying a rope to a donkey and giving it a kick, where it's going to take off, and you're like, oh, everything's leaving behind me, but the rope is going to unravel and pull us along eventually. So I don't get too worried about the industry leaving me behind, and I don't have a good way of staying on top of that anyways. Like you can't scroll Twitter all day looking for unearthed approaches to the technology and then dumping a bunch of money into it. You're going to go crazy doing that. You have to choose your hill to die on. Hopefully it's forward facing, and not necessarily stay in your lane, but appreciate your strengths and weaknesses.
I think that's a very valid point. There's a lot of distractions, but staying true to what matters to you is ultimately going to help you succeed short term, long term as well too. So let's just talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that you've been up to. I know that you've been going to a lot of different events and speaking engagements. You were actually in Boston not too long ago, which was incredible, and I know that you have some other cool things coming up. So before we even get to kind of the event that you've been going to, what's it been like of your interactions when you're kind of going on this world tour and talking to people? What's the reception been like about what you're trying to propose? And how has that been for you, being able to really kind of share your vision and your message with the world?
Well, because I take a different approach to tokenization, involving construction data and data integrity, when I bring up that we're tokenizing commercial real estate, I'll get about a couple seconds of pushback, rolling the eyes. Here's another one of these projects. But if you give me a moment to talk about what we're doing, it gets people to tune in. And that's how I've been able to build up a little bit of a following, and why I am getting invited to speak at new places, because I'm not telling the same old story. People have heard about tokenized whatever for a while, and how it's going to be the next big investment and liquidity and democratized. And then it never comes true. But if I can tell you about the pilot properties that we're bringing on, and the crazy deliverables that we're tracking, and how this is actually saving money and adding value, people tune in. It's no longer a fantasy. It's a practical application of the technology, and that is a breath of fresh air for many people. And like we said before, hopefully eventually the industry starts to catch up, and my talking points will be more commonplace, and I'll figure out what I need to do to stand out. But in the meantime, maybe it's luck, a blessing, whatever, but I'm glad to be in the position that I am, working on the project that I am, and bringing that out to market, and having the opportunity to share it with the world, and then travel the world as well.
I know, this is fantastic. And tell us a little bit about kind of where you are right now. How are you looking to expand? If there are people in the audience right now that are maybe interested in being involved in some form or fashion, whether that be volunteering, or maybe people that may be out there that are looking to kind of invest and stuff of that nature, where are you at right now, and what's the kind of roadmap looking like, short term and long term?
Yeah, so there's 3 things that we're looking for up front. Number 1 are more properties. We've got our real estate development connections, but we want more people building buildings to use building.
Before you kind of elaborate into that, are you primarily where are you primarily kind of focused at right now? Is it more like US, or is it abroad?
We would accept global properties. That's okay. To me, it strengthens the use case even further if we can prove the concept on multiple continents. We do have international relations. I am also incorporated in Hong Kong, and figuring out how we can expand throughout the APAC region. I'll be pitching in Saudi Arabia later this year. Like the year has too much in a month. And so we are really interested in how the rest of the world is going to interact with this approach to tokenization. But certainly, if you're in the US, commercial real estate contacts, any sort of stakeholder, just to first have the conversation. I think education is a big portion of this, but 2, if we can get more properties on, and just continue to demonstrate value and grow as a company, because customer and sales is everything, and to have a lot of assets under management that way, that's quintessential to us. To ensure that happens successfully, and that we're hiring people to verify information so that good stuff is getting anchored to the blockchain and used in artificial intelligence, and helping the success of these properties, capital is always necessary. I have no shame saying that we're going to have to raise a pre-seed eventually. We've raised angel capital and bootstrapped to this point, but if we really want to scale and make sure that this good approach to tokenization makes it out to the market first, we're going to need capital. Because in my opinion, there's been bad approaches to tokenization, and that has damaged the reputation of the technology, of the practice. It's hurt investors and property owners and stakeholders. And so if we believe in what we're doing, we need to get that out to market quickly and ensure that there aren't any more, hype projects or rug pulls that appear. So capital is going to make that happen. It's going to help us grow, help us scale. And that's also going to help us achieve our vision of actually becoming a certification, a gold standard for tokenization. We believe that our approach, the way that we ensure compliance in the real estate itself, how it's built, how it's operated, in the tokens, and the technology being used, and then in the banking and financial area, this could become widely, universally adopted or mandated in the tokenization scene, where before your tokenized property gets included in a wealth manager's fund, they're going to ask, hey, can I see some sort of certification? Is this risk mitigated? I don't feel like doing the due diligence. Can you bring forth some sort of indicator that your ducks are in a row fundamentally? And again, capital is going to help us achieve that. And the number three is just partnerships in general, right? So if we want to continue to improve the technology, if we want to work with private lenders or investors in the commercial real estate space to ensure the success of these projects or to add tokenized real estate to their portfolios, we got to continue to build up those relationships. And eventually, certain lending and staking protocols so that we can ensure liquidity or market makers, those relationships are going to be important as well.
Awesome. Well, we're kind of coming to close here, and I really appreciate all the insights. And I've learned a lot. I know that after this, I'm going to continue to do some more research. And I do apologize. We have a little lawn cutting here in the background, so hopefully that's not too loud. But one of the things that I just wanted to kind of shift it to something more personal and fun for you, right, is that you're traveling a lot, but I know that you've been involved in the Wisconsin scene as well too, and kind of really building out that ecosystem. So, what's that like, kind of in Wisconsin? What's the reception for blockchain, and what's the kind of community building going like?
Well, not to shame Wisconsin, but if you want to talk about blockchain acceptance, Wisconsin is not on the top of the list. Technologically and fiscally, it's pretty conservative. And so there's a reason why I am traveling so much, and it's because we didn't find as much interest in Wisconsin as we were hoping. That's kind of Midwest culture, but that's for better or for worse. There's interest on the coasts and in other parts of the world. Hong Kong is a good example where they're keen on new construction practices, smart city philosophy, as well as looking at blockchain, tokenization, and artificial intelligence. So I'm excited to see how we can grow there and what properties that we get on. The real estate scene is a little tricky to navigate at times, but hopefully eventually I'll know that we've done this successfully if I can go to boring places throughout the US that are overlooked and they're still as eager to adopt the technology because it's just seen as such an industry standard or expectation or a hair on fire problem where you need our solution.
Yeah. Definitely what you got to do is get in touch with Emily. She's based in Chicago, so I know that she's doing some really cool stuff there, and that ecosystem is really growing as well too. And I know that you've been in Boston. What's probably the most interesting place that you traveled so far, and why?
Well, I would say Hong Kong because it's such the greatest contrast between life in the U.S.
How so?
It changed my perspective on a number of things. First and foremost, public transportation.
Ah,
That's how I got around in Hong Kong. And you come back and I have two options when I want to get around. You jump in a car and you drive for 16 hours, or you get on a plane. There's no other option, and I so wish that there was for multiple reasons, whether it's cost savings or how I want to use the time. I mean, sure, I can drive from point A to B, but I'm not going to be working during that because I can't pull out a laptop. I can't multitask. Like I got to be focused on the road. Versus getting to an airport. I just there needs to be alternative options for how people get around, and we've totally dropped the ball on that. And our attempts to implement some public transportation like buses in the US has been totally futile. In fact, I would say that it's been set up to fail because if people don't like their metros, if they don't like their trains and buses, then they go back to cars, and everyone gets a car, everyone gets an auto loan, you're going to buy gas and all the tax on that, and we're going to dump trillions into building the roads and repairing the roads because the buses, for example, just don't have an area to thrive, or the few train options that we have are expensive and go nowhere. So naturally people become adverse to using it.
Yeah. And ending it here, let's kind of shift to our fun little segment called Bearish or Bullish. And we've kind of touched on some of these things, but I'm just going to throw out something out there, and then I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more about why you are bearish or bullish on that. And let's go to something that I know that you're quite passionate about is DePIN. Bearish or bullish?
Absolutely bullish. It's probably the most bullish right now.
How so? Why?
Well, statistically, I think it is the fastest growing, which would be very bullish sentiments. But anything that solves a real world problem is going to stick around. So DePIN, although it's going to have its hurdles, uphill, it's going to stick around. I can't see how it fades away if it's solving a real world problem.
Absolutely. The next one is DeFi. Bearish or bullish?
Also bullish. Institutional adoption has helped with that. I think there's a lot more progress than people realize. So as a trader, I might even call it a little kangaroo. It's going to be up and down, and there's going to be some issues. But long term, as Mr. Fink says, everything's going to be tokenized, and so it's all going to be decentralized. Well, quote, decentralized. It's really centralized, but it'll be aiming towards decentralized finance in the long term.
Nice, nice. And the next one, and we've talked a little bit about this, but AI and just artificial general intelligence with that as well. What are your thoughts, bearish or bullish?
Well, I'm certainly bullish on it as well. I guess we should define bullish and what it means to be bullish. But I think in terms of adoption and longevity, artificial intelligence, just because it's saving money and it's adding value in places, people are going to become dependent on it, and therefore it's not going to wither away.
And lastly, this is kind of a twofer, but green technologies and sustainability, bearish or bullish?
Now that one's a little bit more tricky. I want to be bullish on it, but you always trade with the trend. And I think sustainability was very quickly politicized. Climate always has been. And so it's going to be difficult. It's also here in the US dependent on our administration. But I think not all sustainable practices have to fall under ESG categories, so you can remove the politicization. Some green is just having like beautiful structures, and there's no political ideology associated with that. It's just, hey, can we build something that is attractive and that interacts well with humans and is enjoyable in that way? So I think there's some sustainable elements that we can be bullish on. I think there's other areas like carbon credits that are a little bit tricky, and we might want to be bearish on it just because as a long-term practice, carbon credits, does it really solve the problem? I would say no.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. We can go another hour about that just in general, but time is almost up here, folks. I did want to just thank everyone for coming that I see here: Patrick, Lourdes, Zachary, Gabrielle, Ryan, Graham, Rita, Susanna, Alexandra, Aaron, Susan, Randall, Nayaz, Kopta, Kadian, and I know there's other people here that I can't see, but I really appreciate you all for coming. We want to continue to have these insightful conversations, and Matthew has given me a lot to continue to think about. I really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. And if folks are interested in getting in touch with you or learning a little bit more about what you're building, what's the best avenue for them to go about, and how can they just keep in touch with all the awesome stuff you're doing?
Well, we're right here on LinkedIn, so I think you can click on my name and make sure to send me a connection request. I'm pretty active on here. You're going to see all my updates, life updates and business updates. So go ahead and reach out, and let's set up a conversation. Let's set up a call. Next couple of weeks are going to be kind of busy with travel, but nonetheless.
Where are you going to be traveling to? You got any cool places coming up?
Well, Hawaii for a pitch competition and the self-storage unconference, which is an interesting asset class. Pit stop in Japan, Hong Kong for a little while. So my time zones are going to be a little messed up for a little while, but still, let's have a conversation, talk about technology, let's talk about real estate or adjacent industries like sustainability.
There we go. Let's talk. Let's talk, folks. Well, this has been an incredible conversation, and I appreciate you once again, and I appreciate everyone that's taking time out of their Friday at the end of a long week to join us here. But this is what Just Shilling's all about: knowledge exchange and bringing people together and connections and learning more and really actually taking this and doing something with it after these sessions. So everyone, stay well, be safe, have a beautiful weekend, and look forward to coming and having another conversation on Monday. Take care. Bye, y'all.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye.